Good afternoon to each and everyone. My name is Kyra Vivas, your discussant for today, and this is the continuation of our part in Chapter 11. Let's start the lesson with labor market. Labor markets is where people and employers come together to bargain for labor and wages or other forms of compensation. When we say of compensation, it means kabayaran. So dito nangyayari ang iba't ibang way of payment ng mga employers and employee. And also the number of people willing to work is based upon the level of pay that employers are offering. Labor markets are flexible or inflexible. Ano nga ba ang dalawang to? So let's tackle first the flexible labor markets. It gives employers freedom to hire and fire employees and change conditions of work and pay with few restrictions, mean that the labor markets quickly adjust to a competitive equilibrium. Flexible labor markets involve factors such as easy to hire and fire workers, labor is occupationally and geographically mobile, and lastly, government intervention does not distort the market. And now let's talk about the inflexible labor markets. It requires employers to follow strict rules and procedures in hiring and firing employees. If sa flexible labor market may kakayahan pa ang employers, dito wala na kung ano dapat na nakalagay sa rules, required na nilang sundin. If pag-uusapan naman natin which country has one of the most flexible market, ito ay ang United States. The greater flexibility of the US labor market is no surprise. It could be called a hire and fire labor market, which is a market in which workers and employees can be fired or laid off with few limit placed on it by the state. If sa European labor market, mas binavalue nila yung rights ng mga stakeholder, sa US naman is the interest of managers, employees, and workers are regarded as less important than the shareholders. Also in the United States, worker rights are usually the result of custom and practice, not state regulation. One such factor is the degree to which workers are organized into labor or trade unions. So ano nga ba itong labor or trade union? It is an organization of employees and workers of a company, occupation, or branch that comes together for the purpose of affecting conditions of work and pay. So sa trade union na to, dito nakapaloob yung mga karapatan ng mga trabahador. They have helped bring about things like a minimum wage, rules about safety, and 8-hour workdays. And also, pinaglaban din nila na sila ay magkaroon ng lunch breaks and day off kapag sila ay may sakit or maternity leave. And they've helped set rules to make sure na hindi makakapagtrabaho ang mga bata or yung mga minor. And also, they can't discriminate against anyone and kailangan fair yung pagbabayad sa mga lalaki at babae. Currently, 11.7% of the US labor force belongs to labor unions. Most of these are in public sector unions such as state employees or school teachers. Among private sector workers, only 7% belong to unions. And now, government regulation of the labor market. Although US employers feel that they are subject to extended regulation, such regulation is relatively minor compared to the major European labor markets in Germany, France, and Italy. US employers are regulated by several acts. So these two several acts made to protect workers and improve labor market efficiency. So now let's talk about first the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. So this provides a framework for workers to organize unions through elections at their workplace. It investigates charges of unfair labor practices and can issue formal complaints against employers. Employees shall have right to self-organization, to form, join or assist labor organizations, to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing. And now let's talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Establishes standards for minimum wages, overtime pay, record keeping, and child labor. This act requires employers to pay a minimum wage set by Congress and to keep records on wages, hours, and other information as set forth in the Department of Labor's regulation. In the Philippines, we also have this FLSA wherein meron tayong holiday pay such as 13-month pay and retirement pay. Willful violators may be prosecuted criminally and fined. A second conviction may result in the imprisonment. So let's proceed to the transfer economy. Transfer payments are payments by the state out of revenues from taxpayers to recipients who have not provided a service in return. So example ng mga transfer payments include welfare, financial aid, social security, and government subsidies for certain businesses. Another example would be unemployment insurance, social security retirement checks, or aid to families with dependent children. Para makatanggap ka ng unemployment insurance, dapat natanggal ka na sa trabaho and you don't have June payments. President Roosevelt's New Deal was a series of public work, unemployment, and social legislation designed to pull the country out of the Great Depression and help those harmed by it. At dahil nga sa transfer economy, nagkaroon tayo ng Social Security Act, and prior to it, noong 1935, it has proven to be the most lasting legacy of the New Deal. And also, in 1935, individuals were responsible for their own retirement and they had extended families to fall back on in case of hardship. In 1954, they launched a disability insurance program that provided the public with additional coverage against economic insecurity. In 1956, the Social Security Act was amended to provide benefits to disabled workers aged 50 to 65 and to disabled adult children. And lastly, health coverage to Social Security beneficiaries aged 65 or older. Nearly 20 million beneficiaries enrolled in Medicare in the first 2 years of the program. So here in Social Security Act, meron tayong tinatawag na unfunded liability. It is a shortfall in funds that have been accumulated to meet the future obligations of an entitlement program. So these are debt obligations that do not have enough funds set aside to pay them. And now let's proceed to the U.S. Federal Tax Code, social engineering, and the percentage paying income taxes. Unlike many governments of Europe and Asia, the U.S. government doesn't have a national economic plan or a formal industrial policy. This doesn't mean that the federal government doesn't attempt to direct economic outcomes. The major instrument of this direction is the Federal Tax Code. So we have here the Revenue Code and Tax Code originating in the House of Representatives. Revenue Code, Title 26 of the U.S. Code, is 44,000 pages. It's 5.5 million words in 721 different forms. This revenue code, its main provision explain the personal income tax and the corporate income tax. While the tax code originates in the House of Representatives, 40,000 registered lobbyists at the federal and state level in 2000 Washington BS spent more than $3.5 billion. So, in this tax code, children pay lower taxes to encourage family formation. Homeowners pay less because they can deduct mortgage interest. These provisions encourages home ownership. A number of tax breaks encourage energy saving, such as lower taxes for installing insulation or using wind energy. And that's all for my report. Thank you for listening.